The digital clock on Nadia's nightstand flickered to 2:14 a.m., the neon blue numbers cutting through the heavy, expensive silence of the penthouse master suite. Beside her, Seo-jin Kang slept with the rigid, alert stillness of a predator who never truly closed both eyes, his tattooed chest rising and falling in a rhythmic vibration she had finally learned to trust. Unable to sleep, Nadia reached for her tablet to check the Gloria Brooks Foundation donor portal, expecting the usual trickle of small, heartfelt contributions from students and local businesses. Instead, the screen's white glare illuminated a number that made her blood turn to ice: $5 million. It wasn't just the amount that made her breath hitch, it was the origin. The transaction was flagged by the system as an anonymous wire transfer from a shell corporation based in the Cayman Islands. Her stubborn pride flared instantly, followed by a sickening realization. In the world of the Kang Syndicate, a $5 million gift from a ghost wasn't a blessing, it was a digital shackle. Nadia felt that familiar electricity crackle in the air as Seo-jin stirred, his narrow eyes snapping open as if he had sensed her heart rate accelerate. He sat up, the dark dragon on his neck appearing to writhe in the shadows. "You're shaking, Nadia," he rumbled, his voice like controlled thunder. "Someone just tried to buy my mother's legacy, Seo-jin," she whispered, turning the screen toward him. As his gaze landed on the offshore routing number, the calculating calm he had maintained since their wedding day shattered. His jaw hardened into a sharp, angular line she hadn't seen since the night he dismantled Dorian. "That account belongs to a dead woman," he said, his voice dropping into a grave vibration that carried the weight of a death sentence. "Yuna is back." "Hello, family. Before we continue, I would like to know where you are watching from. Drop it in the comments and also subscribe to this channel." Now let's go back into the story. The silence in the penthouse had transformed from a luxury into a weapon, sharp and cold. Nadia watched as Seo-jin rose from the bed, his muscular frame silhouetted against the floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the flickering diamond carpet of Manhattan. He didn't turn on the lights. The dragon was always most comfortable in the shadows where his secrets lived. He paced the length of the room with a calculated calm, but Nadia could see the way his fingers twitched, a rare crack in his pristine armor. $5 million, Nadia whispered, her thumb still hovering over the glowing tablet screen. "It's a specific number, Seo-jin. It's the exact amount Dorian claimed was missing from the syndicate's accounts before you dealt with him." Her stubborn pride wouldn't allow her to look away, even as the electricity in the room became suffocating. To her, the money was a stain on the Gloria Brooks Foundation, a calculated insult to her mother's legacy. Seo-jin finally turned, his narrow, focused eyes locking onto hers with a lethal intensity. "Dorian was a symptom, Nadia. He was a blunt instrument used by someone who understands the architecture of my life far better than a lieutenant ever could." He stepped toward her, the dark ink of the dragon on his neck appearing to pulse in the blue light of the tablet. "That routing number isn't just a location in the Caymans, it's a signature." Nadia felt the knot in her chest tighten. "You said it belongs to a dead woman. You said Yuna was gone." "I was told she was gone," Seo-jin corrected, his voice dropping into that low, grave vibration that always preceded a storm. He sat on the edge of the bed, the pressurized weight of his history settling between them. 12 years ago, Yuna hadn't just left him with the physical scars that marred his back. She had vanished with a set of encrypted ledger keys, the invisible shackles of the Kang Syndicate's offshore wealth. By depositing that money into Nadia's foundation, she wasn't just giving a gift. She was marking Nadia as an accomplice to the syndicate's darkest financial history. Nadia reached out, her hand trembling slightly as she touched his forearm, tracing the edge of his sleeve tattoos. "She's using me to get to you. She's turned my fresh start into a crime scene." Seo-jin's grip tightened on the edge of the mattress until the wood groaned. "She wants to prove that no matter how much clean money you spend, you are still tied to the dragon. She wants to watch me choose between the Foundation's survival and your freedom." He looked at Nadia, his expression a mask of pride and lethal resolve. "But Yuna forgotten one thing. 12 years ago, I was a man who had everything to lose. Now I am a man who has everything to protect." The air in the room seemed to thin as the realization settled. The Columbia ghost and the dragon were no longer just husband and wife. They were targets in a game designed by a woman who knew Seojin's every weakness. Nadia looked at the tablet one last time before locking the screen, plunging the room back into total darkness. The ghost in the ledger had spoken, and the war for Nadia's future, and Seojin's soul, had officially moved from the shadows of the past into the heart of their home. The private jet banked over the Incheon coastline, the flickering diamond carpet of the sprawling metropolis below a stark contrast to the dark Manhattan skyline they had left behind. Inside the cabin, the air was thick with a pressurized weight, the kind of silence that usually preceded a syndicate purge. Nadia sat across from Seojin, watching the way his narrow, focused eyes tracked the descent. He had traded his burgundy shirt for a tailored black suit, but the aggressive dragon tattoo on his neck seemed to burn with a new, restless energy as they approached his old territory. "This wasn't just my home, Nadia," Seojin rumbled, his voice dropping into that low, grave vibration that always made her heart hammer-kick. "It was my training ground. Every street in Gangnam, every dock in Busan. I built this empire on blood and calculated calm." He reached across the small table, his tattooed hand covering hers, his palm warm and strong. "Yuna knows that. She's bringing us here because she wants to remind me of the man I was before I found you." As they touched down, the dragon's return was felt instantly. A fleet of black sedans waited on the tarmac, and men who obeyed him without question bowed in a synchronized wave of respect. Nadia felt like a deer caught in headlights, her large brown eyes taking in the sheer scale of the power Seojin had once wielded in full. This wasn't the polished CEO of Manhattan. This was the head of a global syndicate reclaiming his throne. They were driven to a secluded villa on the outskirts of Seoul, a fortress of traditional architecture and high-tech security. Inside, Junho was already waiting with a background check that went deeper than anything they could have found in the States. The $5 million deposit had been traced to a digital ghost operating out of a high-frequency trading firm in the heart of the city, a firm owned by Yuna's father. Seojin stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of the villa, looking out at the jagged peaks of the mountains. "She's hiding in plain sight, Nadia. She's using her father's legitimate front to wash the invisible shackles she stole from me." Nadia stepped up beside him, her stubborn pride replacing her initial fear. "Then we don't hunt her like a ghost. We hunt her like a business rival. You said I have a mind you can't buy. Let me use it." She looked at the city lights, her large, expressive eyes reflecting a lethal resolve. "If she wants to play with the Foundation's legacy, I'll show her what a Columbia scholar does to a predator." Seojin turned to her, a slow, dangerous smile touching his lips, a look that usually signaled the end for his enemies. He realized that Nadia was no longer just the woman he was protecting. She was becoming his most dangerous asset. The shadows of Seoul were long, but for the first time in 12 years, the dragon wasn't fighting alone. Nadia stood before the glass and steel monolith of Hansol Trading, smoothing the lapels of her charcoal gray blazer. She wasn't dressed as a maid or a mafia queen. She was a Columbia scholar, her stubborn pride now channeled into the sharp, professional silhouette of a freelance risk consultant. Inside her briefcase lay a resume that wasn't a lie, but a curated weapon. Seojin had watched her leave the villa that morning with a calculating calm, his narrow, focused eyes lingering on her with a mixture of pride and a possessive dread he couldn't quite mask. He had offered her a team of his best soldiers, men who obeyed him without question, but Nadia had refused. A gun was a blunt instrument, a balance sheet was a surgical blade. "I don't need soldiers for this, Seojin," she had told him, her large, expressive eyes reflecting the city's sunrise. "I need access to their server room." Passing through security was effortless. The HR director saw exactly what Nadia wanted her to see. A brilliant, underprivileged overachiever who had clawed her way through the Ivy League and was looking for a fresh start in her husband's home country. By noon, Nadia was installed in a temporary cubicle on the 14th floor, right in the heart of the firm Yuna used to wash the invisible shackles of the syndicate's wealth. As she began her consultation, Nadia realized that the pressurized weight of her years in debt had prepared her for this in a way Seojin's tactical training never could. She navigated the firm's complex financial architecture with a calculated precision, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she looked for the digital ghost Seojin had described. She wasn't just looking for the $5 million. She was looking for the encryption keys Yuna had stolen 12 years ago, the ones that had left Seojin with physical and emotional scars. A sudden chill swept through the office as a woman walked past Nadia's desk, leaving a trail of expensive, floral perfume. Nadia didn't look up, but she felt the electricity in the air shift, a low-frequency vibration of danger. It was Yuna. Seeing her in the flesh, a woman who moved with the same dominant authority as Seojin, made Nadia's heart hammer kick against her ribs. But Nadia didn't flinch. She realized in that moment that she was more dangerous than any of Seojin's soldiers, because she understood the raw data of survival better than any predator in the room. While the firm's security focused on external threats and physical breaches, Nadia was already inside their glass box, dismantling their defenses from the comfort of a swivel chair. She managed to plant a keylogger, the same type of predatory software Caleb had once used to cage her, into the firm's core accounting software. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was using the tools of her own trauma to protect the man who had reminded her she was worth saving. As she packed her bag at the end of the day, Nadia felt the knot in her chest loosening. She had the data. She had the access. She was no longer a deer caught in headlights. She was the one setting the trap. The cool, salt-tinged air of the Han River whipped through Nadia's hair as she stood on the observation deck of the Banpo Bridge. The flickering diamond carpet of Seoul's nightlife mirrored in the black water below. In her hand, she clutched an encrypted drive containing the evidence of Yuna's money laundering, the invisible shackles she had spent the day meticulously untangling. She was supposed to wait for Seojin's tactical team, but her stubborn pride had pushed her forward. She wanted to face the woman who had scarred her husband on her own terms. The electricity in the air shifted, turning heavy and cold as a shadow detached itself from the darkness. Yuna stepped into the light of a street lamp, looking every bit the predator Seojin had described. Her dominant authority was a sharp contrast to Nadia's soft oval face, but Nadia didn't flinch. "You have something that belongs to me, little scholar," Yuna said, her voice a low, melodic threat. "Seojin always did have a weakness for broken things he could fix." "I'm not here for him," Nadia countered, her large, expressive eyes steady. "I'm here for the Gloria Brooks Foundation. You tried to use my mother's name as a crime scene. That ends tonight." Yuna signaled, and 4 men emerged from the shadows, their presence radiating a quiet, dominant authority that reminded Nadia of the monster she had first met in apartment 34A. Her heart began, hammer kicking against her ribs. She was cornered, the bridges railing cold against her back. This was the moment she had feared, the point where her intellect was no longer enough to protect her from the raw data of survival. Suddenly, a low, grave vibration tore through the sound of the wind. "Step away from my wife." Seojin emerged from the darkness, his muscular frame silhouetted against the city lights. He didn't look like a CEO, he looked like the dragon, his narrow, focused eyes glowing with a lethal resolve that made even Yuna's men hesitate. He held a silenced weapon with calculated calm, his thumb resting over the safety. "Give me the word, Nadia," Seojin rumbled, his gaze never leaving Yuna. "One word and I dismantle everything she has ever built, but you have to choose. Do we play by your rules or mine?" Nadia looked at the drive, then at the man who had risked his legitimate empire to stand by her. Her stubborn pride warred with the reality of the threat. If she insisted on a clean legal victory, Yuna's men would likely overpower them before the authorities arrived. If she let Seojin act, she was embracing the very monster she had once feared. She looked at Yuna's cold, mocking smile and made her choice. "Secure the evidence, Seojin, by any means necessary." The dragon didn't hesitate. With a tactical response that was both terrifying and precise, he neutralized the threat in a blur of motion. Nadia realized then that while her mind was a blade, Seojin was the shield that allowed her to wield it. As the dust settled and the pressurized weight of the confrontation began to lift, she didn't feel like a victim. She felt like a partner who finally understood the price of protection. The heavy silence that followed the tactical strike on the bridge was broken only by the rhythmic lapping of the Han River against the pylons. Yuna sat on the cold pavement, her lip bleeding, but her dominant authority remained unshaken as she looked up at Seojin with a chilling, triumphant smile. The evidence drive was secure in Nadia's hand, yet the electricity in the air had not dissipated. It had curdled into something far more poisonous. "You think this drive is the endgame, Seojin?" Yuna's voice was a jagged whisper that cut through the wind. "You've spent 12 years hatting me for the scars on your back and the money I took, but you never once asked why I really left." Seojin stood over her, his muscular frame cast in shadow, his jaw a sharp, angular line of calculating calm. "You left because you were a predator who found a better deal," he rumbled, his voice a low vibration of controlled thunder. He moved closer, the dark dragon on his neck appearing to pulse under the flickering street lamps. Yuna laughed, a hollow sound that made Nadia's heart hammer kick with a new, instinctive dread. "I didn't just find a deal. I was the distraction. Do you really believe your sister died because of a random rival hit 12 years ago?" The dragon froze. The loss of his own sister was the singular trauma that had forged his intimidating stillness, a wound he had tried to heal by protecting Nadia. Nadia stepped forward, her large, expressive eyes searching Yuna's face for the lie she hoped was there. "Explain yourself," Nadia commanded, her stubborn pride demanding the truth even as she feared it. "Your father's rivals didn't kill her, Seojin," Yuna spat, her eyes gleaming with lethal resolve. "She was killed because she found the ledger keys I was supposed to steal. She was going to tell you that your own board of directors, the men you call your trusted inner circle, were the ones selling your territory to the Philadelphia Mortys. I didn't just leave you. I was paid to keep you occupied while they erased her. I was the price of your survival, and she was the collateral." The revelation hit Seojin with the force of a tactical response he hadn't prepared for. His calculating calm shattered, replaced by a raw, visceral grief that made him stagger back. The invisible shackles hadn't been held by Yuna alone. They were held by the very foundation of the empire he had spent a decade building. Nadia moved instinctively to his side, her warm and strong hand anchoring him as he spiraled. She realized the pressurized weight of his past was even heavier than the debt she had once carried. Yuna hadn't just returned for money. She had returned to dismantle the dragon's sense of justice. "She's lying to save herself," Nadia whispered, though her mind was already connecting the raw data of survival. "Check the dormant files, little scholar," Yuna mocked, looking at Nadia. "See who authorized the security bypass the night the sister died. It wasn't a ghost. It was the men who still sit at Seojin's table." Seojin looked at the flickering diamond carpet of the city, his narrow, focused eyes seeing a landscape of betrayal he had been blind to for 12 years. The dragon wasn't just facing an old flame. He was facing the realization that his entire legitimate empire was built on the blood of the one person he was meant to protect. As the police sirens grew louder, Nadia felt the knot in her chest tighten once more. The hunt for Yuna was over, but the war for the Kang Syndicate's soul and the truth behind a sister's death had only just begun. Back at the villa, the air was thick with the pressurized weight of the truth Yuna had unearthed. Seojin stood by the window in a state of intimidating stillness, his narrow, focused eyes fixed on the dark horizon as he grappled with the realization that his own board members had orchestrated his sister's death. Nadia didn't offer empty words. She knew that in this world, the only way to dismantle a lie was with cold, hard data. She sat at the mahogany desk, her stubborn pride fueling a calculated precision as she opened her laptop to begin the purge. She bypassed the initial firewalls of Hansol Trading using the keylogger she had planted earlier, her large, expressive eyes reflecting lines of cascading green code. The $5 million deposit in the Gloria Brooks Foundation was the thread she needed to pull. She followed the digital trail through a labyrinth of offshore shell companies, navigating the invisible shackles that had bound Seojin's assets for 12 years. As she worked, she found the specific subdirectory Yuna had mentioned, the dormant legacy files. Nadia's heart hammer-kicking against her ribs as she realized Yuna hadn't lied. The security bypass that led to the loss of his own sister was signed with the digital credentials of 3 men currently sitting on the Horizon Pacific board. "I have them, Seojin," she whispered, her voice a sharp contrast to the silence. Seojin moved to stand behind her, his muscular frame casting a shadow over the keyboard. He watched as Nadia initiated the purge. With a few keystrokes, she rerouted the $5 million back to a neutral escrow account, effectively clearing the Foundation's name of any money laundering ties. Then, she turned her attention to the stolen assets. She executed a tactical response in the digital realm, triggering a series of cascading failures in Yuna's offshore accounts. One by one, the lost funds, the wealth built on the Kang Syndicate's blood, began to flow back into Seojin's primary accounts. The $2 billion empire was being made whole again, not through a Mafia hit, but through the intellect of the woman he had once hired to clean his floors. "The money is back," Nadia said, her voice dropping into a low, steady tone as she finalized the encryption. "And I've locked the board members out of every subsidiary. They are financially paralyzed." Seojin placed a warm and strong hand on her shoulder. The knot in his chest that had been there for over a decade didn't fully disappear, but it shifted. He realized that Nadia was more dangerous than any soldier because she didn't just kill enemies. She erased their reason for existing. The digital purge was complete, reclaiming his past and securing her mother's name. For the first time, the dragon saw a future where he wasn't just surviving a hunt, but actually living beyond the shadows. The morning sun filtered through the villa's windows, but the electricity in the air remained sharp as the 3 treacherous board members were brought into the living room, their faces pale with the raw data of survival. They were men who had once obeyed Seojin without question. Yet for 12 years they had thrived on the blood of his sister, believing their betrayal was buried under layers of invisible shackles. Seojin stood before them, his muscular frame silhouetted against the light, his jaw a sharp, angular line of calculating calm. Nadia stood by his side, her large, expressive eyes fixed on the evidence flashing on her laptop screen, the digital signatures that had authorized a sister's execution. She felt the pressurized weight of the moment. Every stubborn pride in her expected the dragon to emerge, to deliver a tactical response that would leave these men as ghosts in the mountains of Seoul. One of the men, a senior director who had known Seojin since he was a boy, began to stammer. "Seojin, we were protecting the firm, the instability at the time. It was for the legacy." Seojin moved with a calculated precision, stepping into the director's personal space. The dark dragon tattoo on his neck appeared to pulse, a statue carved from stone, finally coming to life. He looked at the men with a dominant authority that made the air in the room thin. "You spoke of legacy while you erased mine," Seojin rumbled, his voice a low, grave vibration. He reached for a leather folder on the desk. Nadia held her breath, her heart hammer-kicking against her ribs. She expected him to pull out a weapon. Instead, he pulled out a stack of legal indictments and a satellite phone. "I spent a decade believing that loneliness was safer than loss, and that blood was the only currency of justice," Seojin said, his narrow, focused eyes turning to Nadia for a brief, warm and strong moment. "But my wife has reminded me that I am worth saving. And if I am worth saving, then this empire must be worth cleaning." He turned back to the traitors. "There will be no Mafia hit, no shallow graves. You will be handed over to the Supreme Prosecutor's office. Every digital crumb Nadia found, every invisible shackle you used to bind my assets, will be used to ensure you spend the rest of your lives in a cage of the law's making." The board members looked at each other in shock. In the world of the Kang Syndicate, mercy was a word that didn't exist. But this wasn't mercy, it was a permanent transformation. Seojin was dismantling the dragon to become the man Nadia believed he could be. "The police are at the gates," Seojin commanded, his intimidating stillness finally breaking into a lethal resolve. As the authorities led the men away, Nadia felt the knot in her chest loosen in a way it never had before. She realized that Seojin's choice wasn't just about justice for his sister, it was a gift to their future. He had proven that he would no longer trade one set of shackles for another. By choosing the light of the law over the shadows of the syndicate, he had finally cleared the path for a life that was truly worth living. The aftermath of the purge left a pressurized weight hanging over the villa, a silence that was no longer predatory, but heavy with the administrative burden of a fractured empire. Nadia sat in the library, the Columbia ghost, now haunted by a different kind of data, the logistics of stabilizing a multi-billion-dollar syndicate while keeping the Gloria Brooks Foundation above the fray. As she reviewed the asset recovery reports, she realized she was no longer just the woman Seojin was protecting. She had become the queen of the syndicate, the intellectual anchor holding his world together. Every stubborn pride she possessed was tested as she balanced the raw data of survival with her own moral compass. It wasn't just about scholarships anymore. It was about the families of the men who had remained loyal, the legitimate employees of Horizon Pacific who had no idea their pensions were nearly erased by ghosts, and the delicate, calculated calm required to transition Seojin's assets into a transparent era. Seojin entered the room, his muscular frame moving with a grace that was less dragon and more partner. He leaned over her shoulder, his warm and strong hand resting on the back of her chair. "You've been at those ledgers for 6 hours, Nadia. Even the most dangerous man in New York knows when to take a break." "I can't just step back, Seojin," she replied, her large, expressive eyes tired but burning with a lethal resolve. "If I don't bridge the gap between your old world and the Foundation, the invisible shackles will just find a new way to bind us." She looked at the screen, where a charity gala invitation sat next to a tactical security report. "I used to think I was just paying off a debt. Now I'm the one responsible for the interest." Seojin turned her chair to face him, his narrow, focused eyes reflecting a deep respect. He realized that the price of the crown was a weight they now shared equally. "I spent my life believing that power was a trap or a weapon," he rumbled, his voice a low, grave vibration. "But watching you navigate this, you've turned my empire into an investment in a future I didn't think I deserved." He reached out, tracing the line of her jaw with the calculated precision of a man who finally understood that his wife was more dangerous and more vital than any soldier. The knot in her chest tightened, but not from fear. It was the realization that being the queen didn't mean losing herself. It meant expanding her stubborn pride to cover a whole city. She was no longer just a broke housekeeper. She was the architect of a new kind of power, one where mercy was a choice and justice was a baseline. As the city lights of Seoul began to flicker outside, Nadia closed her laptop. The transition was far from over, and the electricity in their lives would always be high voltage, but she was no longer a deer caught in headlights. She was the woman who had cleaned the dragon's house and ended up ruling his heart and his empire. The grand ballroom of the Lot World Tower sparkled, a flickering diamond carpet of elite Seoul society and global philanthropists gathered under the soft glow of crystal chandeliers. This was no longer a syndicate meeting in the dark. It was the birth of a new era, a night where the invisible shackles of the past were replaced by the gold-embossed invitations of the Gloria Brooks Foundation. Nadia stood at the center of the room, her natural curls styled in an elegant sweep, her deep brown skin radiant against a floor-length gown of champagne silk. She was the queen of the syndicate, moving with a dominant authority that made even the most skeptical billionaires bow in respect. Beside her, Seojin Kang was a statue carved from stone, finally touched by the sun. He wore a tailored charcoal suit that hid the physical scars on his back, but the dark dragon on his neck remained a visible reminder of the monster he had once been, a monster who had been reminded he was worth saving. As he looked at Nadia, his narrow, focused eyes held a warm and strong light that had nothing to do with the paparazzi's flashes. The room went silent as Seojin stepped to the mahogany podium. He didn't look at his teleprompter, he looked at Nadia. 12 years ago, I believed that power was a weapon meant to keep the world at a distance," his voice rumbled, a low, grave vibration that carried to every corner of the ballroom. "I believed that my empire was a fortress built on isolation, but I was wrong. My wife has taught me that the only power worth holding is the kind that builds a bridge." "Tonight," Seojin continued, his calculating calm now serving a higher purpose, "we are announcing the global expansion of the Gloria Brooks Foundation. We are committing an additional $100 million to establish centers in New York, Seoul, and beyond, focusing on providing fresh starts for those the world has tried to break." The applause was a pressurized weight of approval, a roar that signaled the full merger of their two worlds. The dragon and the Columbia ghost had successfully turned a syndicate into a legacy. Nadia joined him on stage, her large, expressive eyes shimmering with a mix of stubborn pride and relief. The knot in her chest was finally, irrevocably gone. They had moved past the debt, the late-night confrontations, and the raw data of survival. As they looked out at the crowd, Nadia realized that their partnership was the most successful investment either of them had ever made. In the shadows of the balcony, she saw Junho nod, a silent acknowledgement that the purification of the syndicate was complete. The predator at rest had finally found a home that didn't require him to hide. As the music swelled and the celebration began in earnest, Nadia leaned into Seojin's side. They were no longer running from the past or fighting for the future. They were simply living in it. The new era hadn't just begun for the Foundation. It had begun for the man who had once waited in the dark for a maid, only to find a queen who could rule by his side.